I'm here with Dr. Suzanne Ouellette, Professor Emerita from the doctoral programs in social, personality, environmental, and developmental psychology in the graduate school at CUNY. She was actually a teacher of Ignacio Martín Baró. In fact, may I call you Suzanne?
Yes, of course, of course.
In fact, Suzanne, you serve not only as his teacher, but also as a mentor and also as chair of his dissertation. So you knew him very well.
Mm-hmm.
What are your best recollections that comes to mind when you think about Nacho?
Yeah, there are many memories. Good. I mean, it was a blessing. I mean, he was the first PhD student that I worked with. I mean, I was a baby assistant professor, and this is my first student. It was quite extraordinary. He, although for some reason was a little worried about entering the University of Chicago, being a graduate student, and a mutual friend had told me that Nacho was a bit concerned. And I talked with him before the semester began about his concern, and he presented himself in an amazingly humble way. But in that very first conversation, it became clear that here was an absolutely brilliant person, and he had nothing to worry about in terms of being a graduate student. And he certainly hit the ground running. I mean, what I remember is his clarity about why he was there. He knew how being a graduate student was a part of all of the rest of his life. He was there to gather a particular kind of knowledge that he would be able to use when he went back to El Salvador. He read theory deeply, but it was to use it, to put it to good use. And he would gather as many methods as he could as a social scientist, again, in order to make his science alive and to have it be a contribution. He worked amazingly hard, but that was, grounded in this doing everything hard, doing everything fully, doing everything energetically. Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher, has the expression for the love of the world, amor mundi. He personified that. I mean, he was someone who loved life. He worked hard and he played hard. He enjoyed being a student. He enjoyed being a priest in a community in Chicago that was without many resources. He enjoyed being a good friend.
So he enjoyed living in a low socioeconomic area in Chicago?
Yeah, as a Jesuit in Chicago, he would have been able to live in what was called the big house, which was the fancy house that some Jesuits lived in, that came with a housekeeper, and meals were prepared for the Jesuits who lived there. Nacho did not live there. Nacho lived with a group of Jesuits who were living in another not so nice part of Hyde Park, in a much simpler kind of place. They did their own cooking. They did their own cleaning. And there was a simplicity about his life. And I think to have lived in the big house would have felt terrible.
For him?
Yeah, oh yeah. I remember, yeah.
Huh? So Suzanne, it looks like he likes sort of like a simple type of life, a more down to earth type of approach.
Yeah, I guess down to earth is a good, that's a good phrase. I mean, he certainly enjoyed to eat well. He enjoyed to drink well. He enjoyed music, singing, playing his guitar. But, there was nothing fancy. I mean, I guess probably the best illustration of that. He once visited me in New York City, and it was during the holidays. And we were walking on Fifth Avenue, and the stores were very decorated, fancy lights and windows. And I remember his saying, "This means nothing to me." And I think at that point in his life, things were terrible in El Salvador. And I think it probably hurt him to see, the excess that, money had been spent on all of these baubles. So, but he didn't need any of that. I mean, he was able to find joy in simple things. So
I hear you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what do you think was his intrinsic motivation?
Well, I think he was motivated, given what I said earlier, to learn what he could, that he could put to good use. He was deeply committed to social justice, deeply committed to working with the poor, working from their perspective. And all of it was grounded, I think, in his religious faith. I've worked with many students who were interested in social justice and dedicating themselves to that. And they wanted to be Martín Baró. I mean, one could say that. But I worked hard to help them understand that all that he did was grounded in something. In his case, it was grounded in his religious faith. And I couldn't, tell the students what their specific grounding should be, but I could tell them that they needed one. That this was not just an ideological enterprise. It wasn't just about reading the right things. He had made a personal commitment and felt the support of that commitment.
I hear you. And so all that work that he did post-graduation and of course post-graduation, what kind of influence or what kind of impact all that has had in your own teaching and in your own conceptualizing?
Yeah, a great deal. I mean, he as a teacher, one learns from one's students, and I certainly learned from this student. And it was very important for me to work with him, to read things with him, to see how he could be critical, to see how he could integrate things from different fields, not get stuck, be able to move across disciplines. So there was the reality of that was important. But also after he left Chicago, after he left this reality that we're now still part of, I've had stories to tell about him. And I think that's been really critical for me as a teacher and as a person, to be able to tell others about this one man and how he lived his life as a student. In some ways, he made it seem so easy. And I think, again, it goes back to the sense of he knew why he was there. He wasn't ambivalent. He wasn't thinking he should be someplace else. He knew why he was there and he knew where he was going. And that's a gift, I think. And he had it.
And probably a gift that was also groomed by the relationship with you. And the reason I mentioned that is because I've heard other graduates of yours talking about how much you helped them achieve their own degrees and advance their views and make an impact. But also speaking about Nacho and how you suggested they read his work because it was educational, even in the way in which you do your dissertation.
Yeah. Well, he was required reading in the very first year. What he wrote, how he wrote were really critical models, I think, for many students, not all of the students.
Do you know if many psychology programs nowadays include his writings in their curriculum?
I don't. I do know, I retired now 10 years. So I've not kept up as much as, I might have. But psychology is still, I think, going through this process of deciding what it is. And certainly those programs that have decided to go in a more critical psychology direction, or have decided to go in a more qualitative direction, although there's something important to say about Nacho and qualitative research, or psychology programs that have gone in a more narrative historical direction, I think they would, yes, certainly still be using his work. And certainly at a place like Boston College, you still see a center that's doing very, very important work. The reason I said there's something to say about Nacho and qualitative work, I mean, given psychology and the kind of disruptions, and the borders it gets at, there's this qualitative versus quantitative. And many students have been so surprised to learn that Nacho did quantitative work. He was collecting.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about, because you would think otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, well, he's one of the good guys. I mean, yes, right. This good guy does quantitative work. And I remember because as we were working together, I was getting more and more interested in qualitative approaches and narrative approaches. And I said to him once when he was doing his proposal, I says, don't you want to collect some stories? And he said to me, Suzanne, anthropologists have been collecting stories in El Salvador for years, and it's not been enough.
I see.
That he was clear. Again, he was using social science for particular ends. He knew that there was something he wanted to tell the world. He wanted to tell his country, the people in his country, and people outside of his country. And that quantitative skills would be critical for that. And that numbers would be very important. And that stories, you could have some, but it couldn't stop there. And of course, he also had his own distinctive way of doing quantitative research.
Right.
This notion of lack of response. Some people just, they worry about how many items aren't responded to. But for Nacho, it was, well, why that one? What are people afraid of that they would not, for example, not answer that question? What does that tell us about the structures, those in power? What would they make of that kind of question and a person's being willing to respond to it? So, I mean, he did quantitative work, yes, but in a deeply thoughtful way.
I hear you.
Yeah.
And so you work closely, very closely with him when you both were at the University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard the story about this drawing.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that particular
there's
accomplishment?
Once Nacho left Chicago, and it was clear that he was going back to El Salvador and may come back to the United States to visit. And when he came to visit, it wasn't just to be friendly. I mean, he was there to interview you about what are the latest developments in this field or that field. I mean, he was very deliberate about, again, gathering knowledge that he would bring back. But we corresponded when he was away. I remember his writing at one point that he was amazed he was still alive, and indeed he thought he would not have lived as long as he did. At least that's what he wrote in a letter. But then he was assassinated, and I was still working at that time. And but he was so much part of my teaching and my work with other students. Then I decide that I'm going to retire and I'm going to work full-time as an artist. And I decided that one of the last pieces of art that I would work on while I was still at the university was a large drawing. I would almost say, I guess it is life-size drawing of Nacho. Had to be based in photographs, but, and I gave it to my program when I left, and it hangs in the room where students have their dissertation hearings. And I think I wasn't going to be there anymore to tell stories about him, but that drawing would be there. And people could ask, who is this? And there are people who can answer that question. It was, I mean, I'm sure there's much for me to think through here, but I know there's something to that had to be one of the last things that I did as a teacher, to do a drawing and to do a drawing of him.
Right, how fascinating. As you were transitioning into moving from the university and also moving in the direction of artistry to become an artist. Mm-hmm. Somehow that type of drawing, it was a way, as you said, to offer continuity. Mm-hmm. Somehow that will be a presence and the story can be then told mm-hmm. others. Mm-hmm. Beautiful legacy.
Yeah, and also when, I mean, it's better when you're actually face to face with the person that you're drawing or painting. But even when the person isn't there, there's a kind of conversation that can go on. And
tell me about that.
Well, it's hard to put in words, but you know, you're looking at another person's features, and for Nacho, there was always this amazing smile, and to draw, to get close enough to draw that, you begin to feel that, what that other person is. In order to kind of put it on paper, you need to embody it yourself. So there's a contact that happens, and this was a big move for me to leave the university. I loved working with students. And I think I needed all the support I could get. And I think drawing Nacho was also a way of being with Nacho. And
oh, beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. So
now you know, it becomes emotional because it's like you share a very lively relationship with him, and with steps involving major key steps. So what other memories would you like to share?
Well, I guess probably something about his sense of humor.
That would be great.
Yeah. And he had a way of teasing that was always helpful. I remember, I'll share a story about this that I'll never forget. And I was taught a good lesson. I was talking with him about a person who seemed to me a little too concerned about himself. Okay. And egotistical. And this was later in our relationship, and clearly we had become friends. And he's sitting there, not just sitting there listening to me complain, and he's got a book in his hand, relevant to some area of psychology that I worked in. And he goes to the index, and he's looking in the index. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Gee, I thought sure your name would be in this book." And I said, "It's not." Caught, you know, I mean, it was, here I was complaining about this other person being too concerned about himself, right? And he did it so, you know, with such subtlety.
Exactly.
And elegance, you know, it's not like, Suzanne, you know, you're also a little guilty of none of that. Just you know, but you know, the magician quality, I think, is part of connected with the sense of humor too. I mean, he could laugh, and he could laugh at himself, and he could teach you how to laugh at yourself in ways that were important to him.
How fascinating. And also probably another way to cope with all the stress and risk abilities of being a vocal, you know, defender of those who didn't have a voice otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
That will, you know, bring much.
Yeah. Yeah. His brother Carlos was quoted in a Guardian article about recent happenings, and describing how Nacho's last visit to his family in Spain, how Carlos was worried about Nacho's physical health. And I had never seen that, the debilitation that Carlos suggests in his quotation, but certainly I can imagine, given all of the stresses for so long, that had to have taken some sort of toll. I mean, I remember in one letter he wrote about, my husband and I, when he was going back to El Salvador, had given him as a gift it was an abstract cross made in metal. It was on a leather strip, and Nacho had hung it over his bed. And he wrote that one night the bombs made the walls shake so much that the cross fell onto him. And I was like, oh my God. But for him, it was, well, you know, that happens. When bombs fall, the walls shake, things fall on you. And I was just amazed by how he just took that in stride. And just living, knowing, as he knew so clearly that something was going to happen. He knew. Yeah,
I remember one of the brothers telling me that he spoke with his sister the night before. And he said that he was more and more concerned that they not only were after him, but probably that they will kill him. And what do you know? It happens the following day.
Yeah, exactly.
Very, very daring. And they also were moving to residences throughout the weeks to avoid being caught. But at the end of the day, so much mobility, I imagine, that you can have, and safety. Suzanne,
yes.
Anything else that we need to address? Anything else that you want to share?
He really loved life. I mean, he loved all of it. And I think he loved life in the way that Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher, amar mundi was her phrase, that for the love of the world is what she wrote. And I think he really personified that. I mean, and he loved life in all its dimensions. He loved reading, but he loved singing, and he loved eating, and he loved drinking wine. And in fact, wait, I have a photograph here, I think. Yeah. I don't know. I have two show and tell. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, he's sitting at a table.
Yes, yes.
Up a little bit, it will be, because by now, there you go. And he's sitting at a table. I can see my face also, so let me move to the side.
Yeah.
And there is wine, and there is good.
Yes. There are two bottles of wine. Yes, and I think there were just three of us. But this was at my apartment in Chicago, and he loved to come. and have dinner and to go to restaurants. Now, one didn't go to restaurants very often, but when you went to a restaurant, it was a good restaurant that you were going to. And Nacho would wear cologne. A little too much sometimes, but so I think that kind of that life that he led that had so many aspects, you know, that well, I would often tell students, you know, they would set aside the whole weekend to work on a paper, thinking that that's what they had to do. And if they set aside the whole weekend, made no other plans, the paper would happen. Whereas, you know, Nacho, he was working as a priest in a community that without a lot of resources. So his weekend had to include time saying mass or being with the people in that community. It meant spending some time with the other men that he lived with and being part of the team that would be cooking, and they'd be all eating together and listening to music. So he would have never said that my whole weekend is going to be about just one thing. But my hunch is he got more done on that paper than, you know, many students who had left the whole weekend.
I hear you.
You know, because I think those other things supported him. You know, they filled his heart and his soul. So he had energy and could, you know, then go out and do the other things. So I guess in terms, to go back to this memory idea, certainly one of them is the first time I saw him. I also remember that when he was doing his, you know, he came to Chicago first in this interdisciplinary master's program. And when he, no, it was actually not then. It was when he was doing his dissertation. He grew a beard that he said he would only shave once he finished. And indeed, at the party where for the graduation, he had taken off, but he had grown this big beard. And I don't know what that meant to him, but it was very important that he have this thing. And then that he would be clean shaven again. I think I have memories of him playing the guitar. You know, he was clear about his own life as a priest and what he was doing. But he had great curiosity about how other people were living lives. I remember there was this really crazy kind of ritual that went on among the students at Chicago. It was a Walpurgisnacht festival. I mean, you know, there were witches, and I mean, it was a very unusual event. I never went. It didn't sound like the kind of thing I would like. Nacho wanted to go. I mean, he wanted to see what this was. So we went together. That, you know, I mean, a real curiosity and a real ability to kind of see joy in other people, even though it might not be how he would see joy, but could learn something from that. So I guess, you know, along with all the discipline, which was, and all the self-clarity, this kind of ability to look outward and appreciate what was there and kind of pull from it. But always with this focus on going back to El Salvador. It was unshakable and unshakable. And believe me, lots of people tried to shake him free of it because he was perceived at the university as a really extraordinary scholar. And that, you know, for some faculty members, it was, well, how can he just go back to El Salvador? You know, we can help him get a position wherever he would want a position. And I don't think they ever got it. Why? I mean, but for him, he would laugh. I mean, it was, you know, he knew. He
fell in love
yeah.
with his mission there. It's unbelievable the way he and his family speaks about that experience. And so even when we went back to Spain to visit, sooner or later, we wanted to go back. He knew that he was needed. No, that's very interesting. It became a mission for him.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah.
But let's do this.
Okay.
So,
well, I guess I just want to encourage students, graduate students, to continue reading his work, you know, and to see that there's a real model there, and, you know, to see how important it is to know, you know, why you've decided to pursue a degree in psychology, and, you know, and to be as sure as he was about what he would do with that, and to live a full life, to live a very, very full life, and to seek that grounding that he had, if not in your religious faith, somewhere.
It makes so much sense. So thank you so much. I will treasure this conversation for life, because I've learned so many different things, but also I got the sense through your comments that you yourself has a, what can I call, a humanistic center type of approach with respect to life, other people's views, and with hopefully a possible set of actions to sort of change for a more just society.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have a lot of work to do these days, you know.
I hear you, yeah.
A lot of work to do. And I think we need inspiration for that work. And I think, you know, someone like Nacho is a source of inspiration. You know, I wrote, I don't know if you've seen it, I wrote a piece about Nacho and personality psychology, and how I think his definition of personality is, even though he would never use the word really, or he uses it, but minimally, he's really a social psychologist. But he had an understanding of personality that I think is critical, and especially now. I mean, his idea that personality is what is taken from people in conditions of social injustice. I mean, I think that's an amazing way to think of it. And it's because it's saying that it's through personality that one takes action, that one creates and is able to uphold values and find meaning in life. And so that if there are forces that want to take away one's sense of meaning, you destroy personality. And that's how you can create a people that don't seem to search anymore for meaningfulness. So I think I think there's room to kind of revisit his ideas around individuals and social structures. You know, even though he would always put the emphasis on social structures, my God, what a life he lived as an individual.
Interesting you mentioned that, because we are finishing the 10th edition of the Ivy's and myself book called Intentional Interviewing and Counseling. Mm-hmm. And one of the elements that we are reinforcing now is this idea of challenging the individualistic, intrapsychic view.
Yeah.
Not because it doesn't exist, but because it's always in an interplay with the context, the culture, relationship, and the societal guidelines around you.
Yeah.
So we offer as a skill, a micro skill called focusing. We suggest to our students to look at the person and the challenge they bring with them, to look at significant others or relationship with significant others, relationship with culture and context, relationship with you, the counselor. And I'm looking at counseling and psychology not from a social perspective, but the idea is that you cannot not have these different elements. And we finish up with social justice advocacy. At the end of the day, the whole idea of helping others, at any type of interaction for helping, you know, needs to be transformed into what are we doing next, what we have addressed today.
Right, right.
And so I'm gonna go back and revisit some of those concepts and include part of his thinking on that.